Sonia Fry, my floor director, is cueing me to go to the audience. And we have time for how many questions, you think? 4 or 5 questions? Yes. Okay, thanks, Sonia.
My name's Dave Grunenbaum. I'm a journalist here, recently back from spending 5 months in Myanmar. And I certainly applaud what the networks are trying to do. But my question is, with today, and especially where the younger audiences are going more and more online, do you see your networks more as TV networks that have a web presence, or do you see yourself really as multi-platform news organizations where what we're going to see on the line, on the web, or on mobile is going to be different than what we're going to see on TV? Even if we're covering the same stories, we're going to present them in different ways. Is that where your goals are? Or is it, again, TV with a web presence?
Jay, is the NHK web presence significant?
It is. We have apps, NHK World. If you search for it on the Android or iPhone stores, you'll find the apps. They're free. You can download. You can watch the stream of most of the programming. There are a few shows that may not have rights where you'll see a graphic card. But for the most part, it's live and streaming. We have a test case, I believe, right now that's going on with Sony on some of their Blu-ray players, where it's through the web connection, they're able to also tune in the channel. And we are studying that continuously in terms of making sure that we are a multi-platform service as opposed to television only.
But is the content different? Just because I'm seeing you online doesn't really make you, with all due respect, multi-platform. I'm just
Right.
seeing TV online, so is it really different?
Well, the content that I'm talking about is streaming, so that's not different. But I would imagine, I'm not so involved in the content world in the operations, so I can't answer it specifically. But I would imagine that that's something that's being looked at.
I think it's fair to say, if I may observe them all, at this juncture, television takes the lead in terms of CCTV and NHK and in the new Al Jazeera. However, the old Al Jazeera, when we had the other Al Jazeera, because it's still around, it's just not around here. But Al Jazeera English, for which I worked, and I was very happy to work in 2008 and 2009, they had a significant online presence. And during the Arab Spring, Americans gravitated to Al Jazeera's website for video and original content as well. They had a very significant team of writers who were churning out material for Al Jazeera. I think that CCTV is relying very heavily at the moment on YouTube, having high definition video on YouTube, correct? But it is largely, in fact it's entirely, the content of the channel as opposed to original content, to answer your question. Over here.
And I have to confess, I've never watched any of you. I've tried to look for...
You never watched any of these channels?
Al Jazeera, but so far as I know, my local cable doesn't. And you're paying $30 million per person. You give me $15 million, I'll gladly listen. But my question is sort of then, to what extent my main sources are PBS, CNN, and BBC. But to what extent are you really independent? Suppose, for instance, hypothetically, there's some sort of dispute, as there is, over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. Can you guys give the same description from China and Japan, or can you trade your descriptions?
The Japanese will call it Senkaku, and when she goes on the air, she'll call it Diaoyu.
Okay, but
so beginning there's going to be a difference.
Apart from that, then, can you?
Well, I think that there'll be a Japanese perspective, correct?
Certainly, yeah. Again, I don't speak for the content side for the most part, so I'm not able to give you a direct answer from NHK's point of view. But I believe it would be very independent and very, but at the same time, very much from the position that Japan sees the case.
And Elaine, from the Chinese perspective?
I would concur.
Okay.
I just want to get as many in as possible. The gentleman right behind you, and then Edie, and then I'm going to go to the back of the room.
While you're moving to your question, sir, just for a moment, I meant to mention before, and you brought up PBS as your source of lots of news programming. Through our PBS distribution of Newsline, we reach about 85 million homes on the main stations and other digital channels of the PBS network.
And very quickly, Al Jazeera has taken out an advertising campaign on National Public Radio. which is a very interesting marketing
Well,
strategy.
again, it's not surprising really when you think about the audience. The audience that listens to NPR is the same audience probably that finds BBC interesting and kind of a higher bar of news consumption. So, it shouldn't be really surprising that we're advertising on NPR.
And of course, my favorite news show is Jon Stewart. and I see the promos for Al Jazeera during the breaks on Jon Stewart. Sir, you were next.
I'm Abadi, former director of political affairs in Security Council across the street, and I'm an author and UN correspondent. We might get the impression that we have too many global stations tonight, but in fact we don't. There is a need for more diversity and more variety. Incidentally, just en passant, Al Jazeera English may not shout there in the show, but you have to listen to the Arabic station. They shout on top of their lungs, especially on a program called Contrary Opinion.
Different
Yeah.
Very
audience,
different,
very
I know.
different channel, Al Jazeera Arabic.
I know, I watch all of you and more. We have global stations here that cover things globally, information globally, such as NHK and CCTV and Al Jazeera. They cover, and BBC and all of them, France 24. They cover other regions. Is there a need for the continent themselves to also have global stations? For example, an African TV station emanating from Dakar or from Accra, and a Latin American global TV emanating from Santiago de Chile.
If I may just cut you off and maybe help to answer part of that for Africa, the biggest issue, and Al Jazeera is part of this, and CCTV and NHK, is money.
I know. I was coming to
African
that.
countries may not have the funds to launch a now there are essentially two pan-Africa channels.
Right.
The BBC, which has been in the market forever and ever, and interestingly enough, CCTV. has become an
CCTV
interesting
does.
Pan-Africa channel now. With
They
great
do a
TV.
great job in covering Africa. I follow that very closely.
Let me
But-
cut you off, and if I may, just go to Edie, because I want to give everybody a chance to get a question in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press.
Forgive me.
You're all trying to get a large audience in the United States, and particularly a young audience, because a young audience will sustain your viewers. I wonder whether any of you have thought about what it would take for you all to try and go into universities, into high schools, to try and promote the idea of how important it is for young people to be well-versed in international affairs as a bottom line for trying to sustain your audience.
Along those lines, America Tonight, after one of President Obama's recent speeches, which was about the economy and also the health care, we did a live town hall down in Washington where we invited students from American, from GW, from Georgetown, from all the neighboring, all of the universities there. We filled the audience with those students, and the questions that they asked the panel were so good that people said, you must have planted those questions. And it was so encouraging because when I tuned in to watch it, because I wasn't part of the producing team, I was amazed at how intelligent the questions were. Again, we're so used to listening to town hall meetings where the people are planted by the candidates and asking the questions they know are going to be asked. And these students were phenomenally well informed and asking unbelievably smart questions. And after that town hall, everybody in our editorial meeting was talking about when can we do more? When can we bring in these smart university students to talk about these issues.
Porter.
Could I just add something? Because you're exactly right. The young 18 to, say, 35 audience is what all of these network people who do really, really good journalism are never going to get. Because, as Jim said, they don't watch television.
But they get it if we're online, right?
They're online, absolutely.
But if these networks are online, then we'll get that audience, no?
That's problematic.
Is it?
Maybe, but there's enough research and hard statistics to say that if you're going after anybody under 30 or 35, forget the cable companies and their distribution, because they're not, the young adult is not watching. But here's something to watch, and for all of you guys, in a couple of weeks, Univision is launching Fusion, which is a radical new news network targeted at the 18 to 35-year-olds. They don't want anybody. If you're over 35, they're going to cut you off. And they're changing the whole format and concept of news presentation, and it's going to be really interesting. I don't think the 35-year-olds and under are going to watch Fusion as much as the Fusion guys want them to. I think that there is a whole generation that is sucking up every bit of news it can, wherever it can get. And I agree with what both of you talked about, getting small audiences together of students. I just came from a World Bank conference, and we had 30 Georgetown and George Washington and several other universities, Maryland, kids talking about big data and artificial intelligence, and they asked smarter questions than the scientists who were presenting. We're raising a really, really bright and clued-in generation, but the old media formats, as well as the content, has to be reconsidered and reformatted for a new generation.
Well, I think having a smart digital strategy and multi-platform strategy is vital.
Essential.
Totally.
It's totally essential, and we have a whole department filled with people who are doing nothing but that and trying to figure out.
I want to ask Elaine, too, because there's a CCTV network in China in English.
Same,
We're part of the same.
it's part of the same network.
But their content is different from they don't do very much American news.
Well, that's changing.
And, well, I've been on and at the CCTV English, and it's really far in advance of any of the television network formats that are here. Not just you guys, but the major networks. And there's a reason why the grandfather of all news networks, the BBC, is here with an entertainment network, BBC America, not a news network, because it's not sustainable. It's not economically sustainable.
I've to take one more question, but I feel very depressed that nobody in television wants my demographic. 55 plus, forget it.
All the pharmaceutical companies want
Yeah,
you.
exactly. Right.
There is a critical meaning that is missing in the conversation, which is the premise of the conversation here, which was these worldwide networks being present in America. And we are in the midst of a period where talking about the decline of American power, the demise of the American might, and we see all of these worldwide channels coming into America speaking in English. I think we need explanation for that phenomenon and for that paradigm. And number two, Yemen, I understand and I sympathize because, first of all, my name is Mamadou, and I run a news production company called Next Media, and I worked 28 years for French television as a producer before I did that. And I find that the BBC, which is a world international news channel, is not represented. France 24 is not represented. Rise Africa, which is a news African station, is not represented. Latin American Noticias is not represented. That's not nobody's fault, but I'm just saying that we are not really representative to the world community of the journalistic
You mean not represented
landscape.
here or?
Right here in the conversation.
Well, yeah, actually, we could have had a panel of about 10 people here.
That's
but
fine.
It would have been a bit unwieldy. We did reach out to a number of others, and some of the other networks could not make it tonight. So we did try to do that.
Thank you, but I'm just
Did
noting.
you have a particular question, sir?
The question is actually a comment. I'm contributing to the conversation, which
Okay.
is like CCTV, for example, which is heavily present in Africa.
Yes.
We would like to have an explanation about China, which is really not a democratic news landscape, broadcasting around the world, and broadcasting live from Pyongyang is not news making in essence. Thank you. Also, Al Jazeera, which
You're
is...
saying news from North Korea is not newsworthy?
No, I'm not saying news from North Korea is news. I'm saying that we need explanation in terms of a deeper conversation in the meaning of China CCTV as a newscast globally, and what we know about what's happening in China.
Right.
In terms of
Maybe
their
Elaine
content.
can just have a few words on China coverage.
Well, I think that you will find out what's happening in China on CCTV. And if you watch across the rest of not just what's being broadcast out of Washington, D.C., which is right now only 2 hours, but by the first of the year will be 5 hours. But right now we have 2 hours from Nairobi, 2 hours from D.C., and the rest is from China. So you will get a Chinese perspective of what's happening. And with everything happening globally, why wouldn't you want to know what China thinks about what's happening here, what's happening there? Same thing, I guess, with NHK. You're going to see what the perspective is. If I think it would also explain some of the cultural differences on why China would decide to do this or make a decision or not versus what we see in the United States.
Let me take one last, this is the last question. This young lady here, you had your hand up, right?
My name is Cherie Smallings. I work at an advertising agency, and I also do the PR and marketing on Staten Island at
And we
Island
all
Voice.
need advertising and marketing and public good. Go for it.
I wanted to touch upon the point of the young influence.
I'm sorry.
And
Young
fusion,
influence.
Young influence.
the younger influence and fusion. I think the younger audience doesn't really have a television station to look at currently for this sort of cultural phenomenon happening globally and not happening currently in America.
As a young person, do they want to?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the easy answer is social media because it's our outlet currently to speak and to voice our opinion, but it's not our only outlet. One thing that we find with social media is that it's not always honest. It's not always true. And so we do want to go to an honest form of media to find the answers, to find the truth. So we constantly actually do go to television, or we do go to the stations that we do trust or the names that we do trust in order to get the real answers, not just on social media. So my question is, and I have a lot of friends, especially in advertising, we see that the millennials want to have a place to actually get this cultural experience in America. So are you actually doing the research? Are you working with young people like myself to actually create programming for us that we can actually start to turn back to television and say, we trust you. We want to actually take the voice on social media and actually have that relationship between television and social media again.
It's a very good point, very good suggestion. Jay, you have any thoughts on that?
We have extensive research going on all the time. We've done focus groups in the United States several times with consumers, with our programmers. I know that there is similar research going on throughout the rest of the world. There was a big study that was just done in Europe. I'm going to Tokyo in 2 weeks. I'll have a lot more to tell you after that. I don't have any further specific knowledge about that. But we certainly are looking for the young viewers. And we find also that the viewer that we attract the most is the influencer, the community leader, the people who are the most educated and most interested in learning different perspectives. That's how our viewers come to
Some
us.
final thoughts. Marcy.
Well, I just wanted to just address this point here because it's important. Because the viewers, the people of this age are going to be the people who sustain us in years to come. So what we're doing is we're covering stories of interest to the younger people. We feel that the parents will care too, because if it's about their kids, then they're going to care. So we win both sides. We win the older group if we're talking about things that the younger group cares about. So when we did stories on Obamacare, we did a lot of stories on how the younger people who were basically kind of, I'm not signing up for this thing, why should I? And so we did stories on that. We tried to do stories on climate change in a way that's going to be attractive to younger viewers. And again, on the multi-platform kind of thing, we're trying to reach out. So we have our work cut out for us. I mean, we all come from the world where, you know, I spent 35 years at CBS News, where, you know, it was great for those first, you know, the first 15 that I was there. There was no competition, you know, except for the other two networks.
Watching the news over dinner at 6:30 every night.
I mean, forget about it.
Unheard of.
Yeah, yeah.
Final thought, Elaine.
I think we're evolving. We're trying to find an online presence. We're using social media on Weibo and on Twitter, trying to promote our brand and our station and what's coming up, who we're talking to, and hopefully drawing people to see what's happening on CCTV America. But that is still new, and we're growing, and we're hoping to have a bigger online presence in the future, especially as we ramp up ours.
Well, listen, thank you, Marcy McGinnis, Elaine Reyes, Jay Campbell, and Porter Bib for being here today, and thank all of you. One final thought from me. Between Al Jazeera and CCTV, I would say in excess of 600-700 people have been hired from the ranks of journalism and technology. But if you're looking for a job, don't do what happened to me the other day. I was sitting in a job interview, and I asked the candidate, where do you get your international news? What's your main source for international news? And this young person, eager for a job, said, Twitter. Thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And the Overseas Press Club thanks you, Jim, for hosting a marvelous panel.